Suicide attempts in Washington County appear to be on the rise.
Well, our main focus is to make sure that we don't aggravate or intensify the situation. And so our response is really tailored to the information we receive, what threat there is to the public, and the nature of the threat posed by the person to themselves or anybody else. So we tailor our responses to those calls.
And the ages of those who attempt to take their own lives varies.
We see a mix of issues across age and across a variety of the demographics. We are seeing regularly, we're going on psychiatric issues where people are expressing thoughts of self-harm and they're seeking help. There's times where people who have actually made an attempt and have changed their mind in the process and called for emergency assistance. In other circumstances, they may call a friend and say farewells, and we're contacted to do a welfare check. And we're able to intervene and line up some resources for that person to get some help.
On average, one person commits suicide every 16.2 minutes nationwide. That one suicide death impacts at least 6 other people's lives. That's why it's so important to try and stop this silent epidemic.
So it does seem to be an impulsive thing, that there's something that, you know, life is tough for everybody. But for this person, in that one moment, must have just thought, you know what, I'm just really tired of this. But in the research, they've said that something has happened, a knock come on the door, a phone call, I saw something on TV, my dog came up and licked my hand, and 8 hours later, I wasn't considering it and got on with my life.
Don Reed has been in law enforcement for over 40 years. 22 of those years he spent as a field investigator for the medical examiner's office. Reed has seen his share of suicides over that time and still doesn't have any answers as to why people choose to take their own lives.
The books, the literature, the heavy research that's being done shows that with adults, there's usually about an 8-hour window there. That those who have attempted but survived it have given the best information that, you know, it was just something in that 8 hours. If they get through that 8 hours, they're not likely to.
While guns are the #1 choice and the most lethal, other methods are also used. While females are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide, males are the most successful.
If somebody's committed to the end goal of killing themselves, a lot of times there's not much that anybody can do other than offer those resources, and those are the ones that typically we end up responding to where it's been completed. There's, you know, if there's notes or if there's expressions to people to say farewell and they're dedicated to that cause, they usually are able to carry it out.
I feel like those people who take their own lives in those last few minutes are sort of under the influence, like they would be with hypothermia, that their mind misperceives their environment completely. And so I cannot get into their head and say what caused them to do this unless they left a note, and even with that, some of that you can't understand what they're trying to tell you, what's going on in their head.
Law enforcement plays an integral role in the prevention of suicide, but it's not easy to talk someone down, as they're not always in the right frame of mind.
Our goal is to respond in a way that we can offer services, we can delay their decision until they have some time to maybe rethink, or, you know, time is their best friend. The longer somebody can go through that crisis without making a permanent decision to kill themselves, the more likely we are to get interventions in place. So if we can occupy them, engage them in conversation, delay that decision without forcing a physical confrontation, the better off we are. So we try to avoid those direct confrontations if possible.
I think in law enforcement we've finally learned that if we go to a domestic violence, to have a pamphlet from the Dove Center to say, you know, beyond us, there's so much that we can do. These people can go much further, and they have resources that can go much further for as long as you need it. I mean, everybody needs help. Even we, especially, we teach our investigators to make sure they have somebody in their life that they can talk to and open up and say anything to, and trust enough that they'll keep it confidential. But if you don't have that outlet, it's not healthy for anybody. So especially a person trying to deal with this, the more help you can get, the healthier it is.
While not all are completed, law enforcement are left with the aftermath of determining how and possibly why as an explanation to family members.
We see things ranging from chronic health issues where somebody can't endure the pain any longer and they leave a message saying, you know, I can't deal with this anymore. Others may have a mental health component. Others, you know, there's a variety of aspects that we see on why somebody may take that action, but there's not a general rule of thumb that we can go by to say suicide is caused because of these factors. So,
Often being first on the scene of a suicide, investigators have to sort through the evidence and then direct family members to important resources.
As an investigator, you're able to sit down with somebody that's just experienced the worst thing that's ever happened in their life that they don't think that they're going to be able to live through, and answer questions for them. And when you can do that, it's extremely rewarding. That's the only thing that keeps us going back and doing the investigation, is because we have those times when we can make the difference to the people who are alive, who are going to have to deal with this the rest of their life. You can give them answers, and they want to hear those answers coming from somebody that's been there and done that and seen it with other families.
Law enforcement makes referrals for those who need help to professionals in the community.
there are suicide hotlines and crisis workers that are available. There are resources through the hospital, Dixie Regional Medical Center, and evaluators that will come and make a determination, interview somebody, and they're able to try to diagnose what may be a good approach for treatment. The Southwest Center deals with mental health issues and mental health consumers, and they've got resources that they can provide as well. If somebody was to become aware that a friend or family member is suicidal or having those thoughts and concerns, some of it is communicating with that person. It may take somebody that they're familiar with and trust to open up, and they may be looking for that outlet to have that conversation, and just that support is enough. If there's greater concerns that they're actively pursuing suicide, if they're taking steps currently to kill themselves, then you can call the 911 and report that. Again, our response may not be what everybody would think, that we go and kick the door in and drag somebody to the hospital. That's not within our charter or our bounds, but what we do is we try to respond in a way where we can offer those resources, make contact with that person and talk them through the crisis and get them in touch with those resources, whether it be the Southwest Center, the emergency room, or other counselors that are available.
There are also crisis hotlines and other support groups available.
For the investigator, I often, many times, have been over at the emergency room and gone back into that grieving room and said to them, who can we get here for you? Is there a family member, somebody that you trust, clergy? Sometimes I've had people say, I don't have any clergy, can you recommend? And I say, yes, I'll get somebody for you. That's why most hospitals now have social workers that are well trained in this, and they have a whole list of resources, because if it happens at the hospital, they can sit down and get them to the people they need. I can't imagine a worse thing, being an investigator and knowing how those things affect us, and we've learned to be able to say, okay, that's the reality of life, and I understand more about life because of my experience than most people do. I can deal with that. I can't imagine the person who hasn't gotten to that point that we are, just being left alone out in the desert with what just happened here. They definitely need somebody.